The lights were bright and the cameras were rolling. In front of them sat Whoopi Goldberg, a well-known actress, comedian, and co-host on The View. She was used to speaking her mind and having strong opinions. Across from her was Karoline Leavitt, a young woman who worked as a spokesperson for the White House under President Donald Trump. At just 26 years old, she had already become a familiar face on television, known for her calm voice and clear answers. This wasn't their first time meeting on TV. But this particular appearance was different. The topic of discussion that day was about politics and personal beliefs, specifically how faith plays a role in government decisions. The show was packed with conversation, opinions, and some tension underneath the surface. Whoopi often made jokes during these kinds of debates, and Karoline usually stayed serious, focused, and polite. As the host introduced the segment, both women adjusted their microphones and smiled at the camera. But behind those smiles, there was a quiet understanding. This wouldn't be a simple chat. It would be a battle of ideas, shaped by life experiences, political views, and personal values. Whoopi started off with a question. "So," she said, leaning forward slightly, "you believe God guides your work? That he helps you decide what to say in press briefings?" Her tone was playful, but it carried a hint of doubt. Karoline nodded calmly. "Yes," she replied. "I believe prayer is important. I pray before every briefing. Not because I need help lying, but because I want to speak the truth." A few people in the audience chuckled softly. Whoopi raised an eyebrow and gave a small laugh. "Okay," she said. "So you're saying when you're up there trying to explain something the president did, you just whisper a little prayer and hope for the best?" Karoline didn't flinch. She looked straight into the camera and answered, "I believe leaders should ask for guidance. It's not about hoping, it's about staying grounded." The studio was silent for a moment. Then, Whoopi laughed again, more openly this time. "Well, if praying could fix everything, we'd have had better results over the last 4 years, she said with a smirk. Some of the audience members laughed louder now. Others looked around, unsure whether to react. Karoline kept her composure. She didn't raise her voice or argue. Instead, she took a deep breath and responded with a steady tone. "I think prayer gives strength," she said. "It doesn't mean everything will always go perfectly, but it means you can handle what comes next, with honesty and courage." Whoopi paused. For a second, it seemed like she was thinking about what Karoline had said. Then she waved her hand lightly and changed the subject. All right, she said, smiling. "Let's move on." But even though the moment passed quickly, it left a mark. Off camera, the crew whispered among themselves. Some thought Whoopi had been too harsh. Others admired Karoline's ability to stay calm under pressure. Later that night, clips from the show began to spread online. People watched the exchange between Whoopi and Karoline over and over again. Some praised Karoline for standing up for her beliefs. Others criticized Whoopi for making fun of someone else's faith. Back home, Karoline watched the clip quietly. She didn't seem upset. She knew what she believed in, and she knew why it mattered. Her parents had raised her with strong values. Her church community had supported her through school and early career struggles. And now, as one of the youngest White House spokespeople ever, she wanted to be a voice for others who believed like she did. Meanwhile, Whoopi sat in her dressing room after the show. She flipped through her notes and stared at the monitor where the live feed still played. One of her assistants came in with a bottle of water. "Tough crowd today?" he asked. Whoopi shook her head. "Not really," she said. "Just reminded me how different we all are." She thought about Karoline's answer. It stuck with her. Not because it was shocking, but because it was sincere. Whoopi had spent decades in the spotlight, learning how to fight back with humor, sarcasm, and quick wit. But here was a young woman who chose calmness over conflict, belief over bitterness. Over the next few days, the clip continued to circulate. On social media, people debated the role of faith in politics. Some called Karoline brave. Others called her naive. But one thing was clear: she had made an impression, and Whoopi noticed. During a later episode of The View, she brought up the moment again, not to mock, but to reflect. You know, she said, sometimes we forget that people really do believe things deeply. I may not agree with everything she says, but I respect that she stands by what she believes. That comment surprised many of her fans. Some agreed, others disagreed, but it showed that even in moments of disagreement, understanding could grow. Back. In Washington, Karoline read the news about Whoopi's comments. She smiled slightly, then turned back to her work. There was always another press briefing, another statement to prepare, another chance to speak clearly and honestly. She didn't need praise. She just needed to stay true to herself, and that she had done. The next time Karoline Leavitt appeared on national television, she knew the eyes of the country would be on her again. She was still young, still one of the youngest White House spokespeople in history, and still standing firm in her beliefs. But now, after her last appearance with Whoopi Goldberg, people were watching more closely than ever. She had always believed that faith played a big role in her life. Her parents raised her with strong values. They went to church every Sunday, prayed before meals, and taught her that honesty and kindness mattered more than being popular or powerful. That belief stayed with her even as she stepped into the fast-moving world of politics, where many people seemed more focused on winning than doing what was right. When she sat down for another live interview days after the first show, she wasn't nervous. She had prepared for this moment like any other. But something felt different. The host smiled at her, and the audience gave a polite round of applause. Then came the question she had been expecting. "Karoline," the host said, "you recently had a conversation where you talked about how your faith guides your work. Some people thought it was inspiring. Others said it's not something we should hear from someone in your position. What do you think?" She didn't hesitate. "I believe leaders should be honest and grounded," she said. "For me, prayer helps me stay focused. It reminds me why I'm here, to serve, not to show off." A few people in the crowd nodded. Others looked thoughtful. The host smiled but kept going. "You also had a bit of a back and forth with Whoopi Goldberg. She made a joke about praying through press briefings. How did that make you feel?" Karoline took a breath. She didn't want to sound angry or defensive. She wanted to explain. "Wasn't offended," she said. "Whoopi is known for her humor, and I understand that. But I also know what I believe. If anything, I hoped people saw that I could answer without getting upset. Faith isn't about being perfect. It's about staying calm when things get tough." The host nodded, then turned to the panel. Whoopi Goldberg was there again, sitting across from Karoline. This time they locked eyes for a second before Whoopi spoke. "Well," Whoopi said with a smile, "I have to admit I didn't expect you to come back so strong." Karoline gave a small smile. "I just said what I meant." Whoopi leaned forward slightly. "And I respect that," she said. "But let's be real. You're telling us you actually pray before every briefing? Like, seriously?" The audience chuckled. Karoline didn't laugh. She looked straight ahead and answered clearly. "Yes," she said. "Every time. Not because I need help lying, but because I want to tell the truth." There was a pause. The room was quiet for a moment. Whoopi blinked, surprised by the strength behind the words. She had expected a softer reply. Instead, Karoline had delivered, a punch without raising her voice. Then slowly Whoopi laughed, but not in a mocking way. It was more like she had just realized she was talking to someone who truly believed what she said. "You're something else," Whoopi said, shaking, her head slightly. "Most people in your job try to dodge questions. You just go straight for the heart." Karoline didn't respond with a joke or a comeback. She simply nodded. "I don't want to dodge anything," she said. "That's not why I'm here." The studio stayed quiet for a beat longer than usual. People were listening now. Really listening. Later that night, the clip began to spread online once again. People shared it on social media. Some praised Karoline for staying calm under pressure. Others debated whether faith had a place in politics. But no matter which side people were on, one thing was clear. Karoline Leavitt had made an impact. Back in her dressing room, Whoopi watched the replay on a small screen. One of her assistants walked in with coffee. "You okay?" he asked. Whoopi pointed at the TV. "Did you see that?" He nodded. "Yeah, pretty strong response." She sighed and leaned back in her chair. "You know, most people my age have figured out what they believe. But here's this young woman, barely older than my daughter, and she's already sure of herself. That's rare." Her assistant handed her the coffee. "Maybe that's why people like her." Whoopi sipped her drink and stared at the screen. "Or maybe that's why people don't like her," she said. "Some folks don't like when others stand for something real." She paused, then added, "Still, I kind of admire it." Off camera, Karoline was preparing for her next briefing. She checked her notes, adjusted her jacket, and took a deep breath. She knew the questions would be hard. She knew some reporters would try to trip her up. But she also knew that she had something bigger than politics guiding her, and that gave her peace. As she stepped into the press room, the cameras flashed. Reporters called her name. She stood tall and faced them all. "Good afternoon," she said. One reporter raised his hand. "Ms. Leavitt, you've been in the spotlight lately. Some say your public appearances are more about image than substance. How do you respond to that?" She didn't look away. "I respond by doing my job," she said. "And that means giving the American people honest answers even when it's not easy." Another reporter jumped in. "You also talk a lot about faith. Do you think that affects how people see you?" Karoline smiled slightly. "I hope it shows that I care about more than just headlines. I care about truth." There was a short silence. Then another question came, and another. But Karoline handled each one calmly, confidently. After the briefing ended, she returned to her office. There was a message waiting for her on her phone. It was from a young girl who had seen her on TV. "Thank you for speaking up," the message read. "You made me proud to believe in something." Karoline read it twice. Then she saved it. She knew the criticism would keep coming. She knew not everyone would agree with her, but she also knew that if even one person found strength in her words, it was worth it. Meanwhile, Whoopi sat in her dressing room again, thinking about their exchange. She wasn't planning to change her views. She wasn't suddenly going to start praying before every show. But she couldn't deny that Karoline had left a mark. Not with anger, not with drama, but with calmness, with confidence. And sometimes that was the strongest kind of power. The days after the interview passed quickly, but the conversation didn't stop. People were still talking about Karoline Leavitt's calm answer to Whoopi Goldberg. Some said she was brave. Others thought she was just trying to look good on TV. But for those who watched closely, there was something real behind her words, something stronger than politics or fame. Back at the White House, Karoline kept doing her job like nothing had changed. She prepared for press briefings, met with reporters, and answered tough questions without flinching. But deep down, she knew this moment had shifted something. Not just for her, but for how people saw young women in powerful roles. She wasn't the first to face hard questions on live television. But she was one of the youngest, and that made her different. One morning, as she walked into the press room, a few reporters gave her small nods of respect. It wasn't much, but it meant something. They had seen her handle pressure before cameras, and now they saw her differently. Not just as a spokesperson, but as someone who could stand her ground. As the briefing began, the usual crowd of journalists filled the room. The lights were bright, the microphones were on, and the world was watching. A reporter raised his hand. "Ms. Leavitt," he asked, "you've been in the spotlight lately because of your recent interviews. Some say you're using faith to avoid answering difficult questions. How do you respond to that?" Karoline looked straight ahead. She didn't blink or hesitate. "I believe faith helps me stay honest," she said clearly. "It doesn't help me avoid anything. If anything, it makes me want to face things more directly." Another reporter jumped in. "But isn't it risky to talk so openly about personal beliefs when you're in a political role? Doesn't that take away from your credibility?" Karoline took a breath. She had thought about this before. "No," she said. I think being honest about who I am adds to my credibility. People deserve to know that I'm not hiding behind words. I believe in truth, I believe in service, and yes, I believe in prayer. There was silence for a second. Then another question came. And another. She answered each one with the same calmness. Later that night, clips of the briefing started to spread online again. People shared them on social media. Some praised her for staying true to herself. Others debated whether mixing faith and politics was right. But no matter what side they were on, most agreed on one thing. Karoline Leavitt had a quiet kind of strength. Back home, she sat on the couch with her laptop open. She scrolled through some of the comments left online. Most were kind. A few were harsh. But she read them all anyway. One message caught her eye. It was from a high school girl who had watched the briefing in class. "Thank you for showing that girls can be strong without being loud," the message said. "You made me proud to believe in something bigger than myself." Karoline smiled. She typed a short reply. "Thank you. Keep believing in yourself." Meanwhile, Whoopi Goldberg was getting ready for another episode of The View. She sat in her chair backstage, flipping through notes and sipping coffee. Her producer walked in. "Hey, did you see the latest clip of Karoline?" he asked. Whoopi nodded. "Yeah, she's got guts," he smiled. "You like her, don't you?" She laughed softly. "I wouldn't go that far, but I respect her. That's not easy to do, being calm when everyone wants you to fight." He handed her a note card with talking points for the show. "So, are you going to mention her today?" Whoopi thought for a moment. "Maybe. Not to pick a fight, just to say what I saw." And that's exactly what she did. During the show, she brought up the topic of young leaders and public figures. One of the other co-hosts turned to her. "What do you think about Karoline Leavitt?" she asked. "Some people love her. Others think she's too young or too soft." Whoopi leaned forward. "Well," she said, "let me tell you something. I've met a lot of politicians. I've seen a lot of people try to act strong, but Karoline? She's different. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't get angry. She just says what she believes, and she means it." The audience listened closely. "I may not agree with everything she says," Whoopi added, "but I respect that she stands by her values. That's rare these days." The room stayed quiet for a second. Then, slowly, some people clapped. Backstage, a producer watched the live feed. He sent a quick message to Karoline's team. "She just praised you on air." Karoline read the message and smiled again. She didn't need praise to keep going. But it felt good to know someone had noticed. That
night, she called her mom. "How was your day?"
her mother asked. Karoline sighed. "Long, but good." "Did you hear what Whoopi said about you?" Karoline nodded. "Yeah, I saw it." Her mom paused. "You handled yourself well." Karoline looked out the window. "I just wanted to speak the truth." "And you did," her mom said proudly. "That's all we ever taught you." They talked a little longer, then said goodnight. Karoline put her phone down and looked at the city lights outside. There would be more questions tomorrow, more debates, more moments under the spotlight. But she was ready, because even though she was young, she knew what mattered most. Not winning arguments, not proving others wrong, just speaking honestly and standing firm, even when the whole world was watching. The weeks passed, but the moment between Karoline Leavitt and Whoopi Goldberg stayed on people's minds. Clips of their conversation were still being shared online. Some saw it as a lesson in respect. Others thought it was just another debate on TV. But for those who had been watching closely, something had changed. Not just in how people talked about faith and politics, but in how they saw young leaders like Karoline. Back at the White House, Karoline kept doing her job. She gave press briefings, answered hard questions, and tried to stay calm even when reporters tried to trip her up. But now, there was more attention than before, more eyes, more pressure, and sometimes that made things harder. One morning, she sat at her desk with a notebook open. She was writing down thoughts, things she wanted to say during the next briefing. Her phone buzzed. A message came in from a friend. "Did you see what Whoopi said last night?" It read. Karoline opened the link. It was from The View. Whoopi was talking about young women in public life. "She's got guts," Whoopi said on the show. "And I don't mean that in a show-off kind of way. I mean, she's standing by what she believes, even when people are watching, waiting for her to fall." Karoline smiled slightly as she watched the clip. She hadn't expected that. She knew Whoopi didn't always agree with her views, but hearing her speak like this felt different. She saved the video and kept going with her day. Later that afternoon, she walked into the press room. The usual crowd of reporters was there. Cameras rolled, lights blinked, questions flew fast. A reporter raised his hand. "Ms. Leavitt, you've been in the spotlight lately. Some say your recent interviews have made you a symbol of youth and strength in politics. How do you feel about that?" Karoline took a breath. "I don't think about symbols," she said. "I just try to do my job well. That means giving honest answers even when it's not easy." Another voice called out. "You also spoke about prayer guiding your work. Do you think people take that seriously in today's world?" She looked straight ahead. "I hope they do," she said, "because it's not about politics. It's about staying grounded, about remembering why we're here, to serve, not to impress." There was silence for a second. Then another question came, and another. But Karoline handled each one with the same quiet strength. After the briefing ended, she returned to her office. There was an email waiting for her, from someone she didn't know. "I'm a young woman studying political science," it read. "I saw your interview with Whoopi Goldberg. You inspired me to believe that I can be both strong and kind in this world." Karoline read it twice. Then she replied, "Thank you. Keep believing in yourself." Meanwhile, Whoopi was backstage after another episode of The View. One of her assistants handed her a coffee. "You really liked that response she gave."
Huh?
he asked. Whoopi nodded. "Yeah. Not because I agree with everything she says, but because she speaks with honesty. That's rare these days." He smiled. "So, does that mean you're a fan now?" She laughed. "Not exactly, but I respect her. That counts for something." Later that week, Karoline got invited back on the show. She wasn't sure if it was a good idea at first. She had already faced enough questions. But she agreed anyway. Not to argue, not to prove anything, just to keep speaking clearly. When she walked onto the set, Whoopi stood up and gave a small wave. The audience clapped politely. As the cameras rolled, Whoopi leaned forward. "So," she said, "you ready to go again?" Karoline smiled slightly. "I'm always ready to talk." They started off slow. They discussed current events, the role of young voices in politics, and the pressure of being on national television. Then Whoopi brought it back to faith. "You know," she said, "I've thought about what you said before, about how prayer helps you stay focused." Karoline nodded. "Yes," Whoopi paused. "I may not pray the same way, but I understand needing something bigger than yourself to hold on to." That surprised some of the other co-hosts. The studio stayed quiet for a moment. Karoline looked at Whoopi and said, "It's not about being the same. It's about being real." Whoopi smiled. "Well said." The rest of the interview went smoothly. No fights, no drama, just two women having a real conversation. After the show, they stepped off the stage together. Whoopi turned to Karoline. "You did good," she said. Karoline smiled. "Thanks, so did you." They didn't become best friends. They didn't suddenly agree on everything, but they understood each other a little better, and sometimes that's all it takes to change the way people see the world. Later that night, clips of the interview began to spread again. People talked about how two very different women could sit across from each other and still find common ground. Some called it inspiring. Others called it smart politics. But no matter what people thought, one thing was clear. Karoline Leavitt had made her mark, and Whoopi Goldberg had noticed. Back home, Karoline sat on the couch with her laptop open. She checked her messages. Another note caught her eye. "I used to think I had to be loud to be heard," it read. "But you showed me that sometimes the strongest voices are the ones that speak calmly. Karoline smiled again. She typed back, "Thank you. Keep speaking truth." Outside, the city lights glowed. Tomorrow would bring new questions, new debates, new moments under the spotlight. But for now, she was okay with the quiet, because she had spoken her truth, and someone had listened. The weeks turned into months, and life kept moving fast. Karoline Leavitt was still doing her job at the White House, giving briefings, answering tough questions, and staying calm under pressure. But now people saw her differently, not just as a young spokesperson, but as someone who had stood tall when the spotlight burned the brightest. She still prayed before every briefing. Not because she needed help with the answers, but because it reminded her why she was there, to serve, not to show off. She believed that truth mattered more than popularity, and honesty mattered more than applause. Backstage after one of her briefings, a young intern came up to her. "I watched your interview with Whoopi Goldberg," the girl said. "It made me proud to be a woman." Karoline smiled. "Thank you," she said. "You know, I don't do this to be famous. I do it because I believe in what I'm saying." The intern nodded. "That's what makes it special." Later that night, Karoline sat at her desk going over notes for the next day's press meeting. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from a high school student who had seen her on TV. "Used to think I had to hide what I believed in," the message read. "But watching you speak gave me courage." Karoline read it twice. Then she saved it. She knew not everyone agreed with her. She knew some people thought she was too young or too soft. But she also knew that if even one person found strength, in her words, then it was worth it. Meanwhile, Whoopi Goldberg was back on The View, getting ready for another episode. She sat in her chair, flipping through her notes, sipping coffee like always. Her producer walked in. "Did you see the latest poll?" he asked. Whoopi looked up. "What poll?" He smiled. "About young leaders. People are starting to respect them more, especially women like Karoline Leavitt." Whoopi raised an eyebrow. "Well, she earned it." He handed her a note card. "So, are you going to mention her today?" She thought for a second. "Yeah," she said. "Not to argue, just to say what I saw." And during the show she did exactly that. "Look," she told the audience, "I've met a lot of politicians. Some talk loud and never say much. Others say nothing but make you feel something. Karoline, she's one of those rare ones who speaks softly and still gets heard." The studio stayed quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, people began to clap. One of the other co-hosts turned to her. "You really respect her, huh?" Whoopi nodded. "Yeah, I may not agree with everything she says, but I respect that she means it. That's not easy these days." Back at the White House, Karoline was getting ready for another long day. She checked her phone and saw a clip from the show. She watched it quietly. Then she smiled. She didn't need praise to keep going. But it felt good to know someone had noticed. That afternoon, she stepped into the press room again. The lights were bright. The cameras rolled. Reporters called her name. A familiar voice asked, "Ms. Leavitt, you've been in the public eye for a while now. What keeps you going?" She looked around the room. "Belief," she said simply. "Belief in truth. Belief in service. And belief that even small voices can make a difference." Another reporter asked, "Do you ever get tired of being questioned?" Karoline shook her head. "No," she said. "Because if people are asking questions, that means they're listening." There was silence for a moment. Then the next question came. And the next. She answered each one with the same calmness, the same confidence. After the briefing ended, she returned to her office. On her desk was a letter from a teacher. "My students watched your interview," it read. "They wrote letters about what they learned from your words. Thank you for showing them that strength doesn't always come from being loud." Karoline read it carefully. Then she replied, "Thank you for teaching them well." Later that week, she got invited back on The View. This time, it wasn't for a debate, It was for a conversation. Two women, two different views, sitting across from each other, not to fight but to understand. When she walked onto the set, Whoopi stood up and smiled. "Welcome back," she said. Karoline took her seat. "Thanks for having me." They talked for a while, about leadership, about youth, about the power of belief. They didn't agree on everything, but they listened. That meant something. At one point, Whoopi leaned forward. "You know," she said, "sometimes I forget how brave it is to stand by what you believe, especially when people are watching." Karoline nodded. "Sometimes it's scary," she admitted, "but I believe speaking truth is always worth it." The audience clapped softly. Later, after the show, they walked off the stage together. "You handled yourself well," Whoopi said. Karoline smiled. "Thanks, so did you." They didn't become best friends. They didn't suddenly think the same way. But they respected each other, and sometimes that's all it takes to change the way people look at the world. Back home, Karoline sat on the couch with her laptop open. She scrolled through some messages. One caught her eye. "I used to be afraid to speak up," it read. "But seeing you talk made me believe I could too." Karoline typed a reply. "Thank you. Keep believing in yourself." Outside, the city lights glowed. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more debates, more moments under the spotlight. But tonight, she was okay with the quiet, because she had spoken her truth, and someone had listened, and that, she knew, was enough.